what he likes. I sure did watch him showing up wearing black and eating on that. His daddy's on death row, let us say it with his chest out. His friends moved out, he hasn't tried out, but he always had a problem saying now. His older brother loved the valedictorian. His mother said he's screaming he should be more like him.
This will be the last video in our in Unit 1. In Unit 1, we're talking about different forms of insurance and some of the terminology associated with insurance products, insurance industry, terminology that safety professionals should be familiar with, terminology that could show up on certified safety professional exams or other certification exams. This last video, we're going to talk about coverage types just very quickly. I just want to give you a taste of the other types of coverage that are out there besides workers' compensation coverage. And the bulk of the class will be placed on workers' compensation coverage, but there are other types of insurance that we may have to work with as safety professionals. One of those types of insurance that we may have to work with as a safety professional is liability insurance, or general liability insurance. First of all, let's talk about what we mean by liability, probably a familiar term to most of you. Liability refers to the legal financial responsibility for property damage, injury, or other harm to other parties. If we cause harm to others and we are found liable, this type of insurance will help protect the company financially. For example, here are some examples of where liability insurance would be needed. A customer slips and falls because of a spill in the produce section of a grocery store. The store is liable because it did not clean up the spill. It could be found negligent. Liability insurance would help cover the cost associated with this negligence. Another example of where liability insurance could come into play. A construction company removes trees on property that's not part of the project. They were careless. Someone doesn't read the plans properly. Someone doesn't know the project boundaries accurately, and they end up taking out trees on private property, which actually happened on a project that I was on. But come to find out, the trees that were taken out were actually within the project boundaries, and we had pictures to prove that the trees were within project boundaries. So we ended up being okay in that particular case. But if we had been found liable, then our liability insurance coverage would have compensated the third party that filed a claim against us. We talked about product liability in an earlier video. Let's say a company manufactures a toy with sharp edges. Their liability coverage, or their general liability coverage, would protect that company from any claims against the company for damages. Now remember, there are limitations on insurance coverage. Let's say this company manufactures this toy and it goes out and it injures 100,000 children, and there are 100,000 lawsuits out there. Well, there's going to be a limitation on how much that insurance company is going to be responsible for. It's only going to be up to the limits of the coverage. If the coverage is limited to, let's say, $20 million, then anything beyond $20 million, then that insurance company is not going to be liable for. And limitations within the contract, the insurance contract, need to be considered. Companies need to make sure they have enough coverage and that the limits are high enough to cover any potential losses that may be encountered by the company. In the case of the customer that's slipping and falling and being injured, the store's liability insurance coverage will indemnify the injured customer. One thing that we as safety professionals, let me back up a little bit. Depending on the type of organization you work for, third-party liability may be a bigger issue for you. If you go to work for Walmart or Lowe's or Target as a safety professional, one of your objectives will be to protect customers from injuries. You want to protect customers from injuries. You want to protect the company from liability claims from customers who claim to be injured on your property. As when you're in those circumstances, as a safety manager working for a Walmart or a Lowe's or a Target, you may spend significant time protecting your company from these types of liability claims. And there's also time that's likely to be spent protecting the company from fraudulent liability claims. There are some con men, some criminals out there who prey on companies, and they will go into a Walmart or a Lowe's or a store like that, claim that they were injured, and file a fraudulent liability claim against the company and the company's insurance. As safety managers, part of our responsibility, if we work for those companies, would be to protect the company from those types of claims. There's all kinds of technologies, there's all kinds of tools available to help protect a company from those types of claims. But it's an ongoing battle between criminals who would engage in this type of fraud and these types of companies that have deep pockets. Criminals know they know the companies with the deep pockets, and they're going to prey on those companies with those deep pockets. And they also understand that in a lot of cases, the company may be willing to pay out a settlement rather than have the case go to court. So significant issues when it comes to liability claims and fraudulent liability claims, depending on who you go to work for as a safety manager. In the highway construction industry, we always had to be concerned about protecting the public that was passing through our work zones. We needed to make sure that we were doing everything within reason to prevent accidents within our work zone. We had vehicles passing through a work zone. If there was an accident in our work zone, we could be caught up in a liability case if that accident was serious and resulted in property damage or personal injury. We're really getting into some areas where lawyers need to be involved. The legal department of your company would also be involved if we're talking about liability claims, especially fraudulent liability claims. But safety managers working with legal professionals, working with other professionals within the company will team up to help protect the company from these types of incidents, these types of claims. But back to our main point, I'm kind of deviating here. Again, liability, we can be held responsible for property damage or injury to other parties as a company. Liability insurance coverage helps protect us in those instances, helps protect us and in terms of our financial responsibility in those types of instances, those types of cases. Building and personal property coverage, and I'm going to move on a little more quickly through this. I got rambling on that last one. Building and personal property coverage covers buildings, covers personal property. Normally excludes exterior improvements. It wouldn't cover a driveway that was damaged in some way, or landscaping that was damaged by a tornado. That would not be covered under most building and personal property policies. The contents of buildings would be included, the building structures and the contents of buildings, up to the coverage limits. And that's, again, it's important to make sure that the coverage limits are adequate. If you have $1 million worth of contents within your building, you need to make sure that the coverage limits are sufficient to compensate for your losses if that $1 million of contents were lost in an incident. And this is a deficiency you see a lot with policies. They have coverage, but it's not sufficient. The limits are inadequate. They'll have a $500,000, or let's talking in terms of a business, they'll have a $5 million building, but the limits, the coverage limits, are $4 million. The contents of the building may be valued at $3 million, but the coverage limit for the contents is $1 million. Companies need to ensure that their limits are appropriate for the facilities that are covered by the policy. Personal property also can be covered by building policies. Now, this would be the personal property, including the personal property of employees, of the insured and of the employees of that company. So if you worked for Phillips 66 office burns down where you're working, and you lose a family heirloom that's valued at $1,000, you could possibly be able to be compensated for that loss under the company's building and personal property coverage policy. Generally, this type of insurance excludes vehicles unless the business is in the business of selling vehicles. If it's an auto dealership, then building and personal property coverage or some variation of it would be applicable. But normally a company will have a separate policy for its vehicles, for its rolling assets. Also excludes animals unless the business sells animals. Companies need to make sure to review their coverage periodically. Make sure all of their assets are covered. Make sure the coverage limits are appropriate for the assets that are covered by the policy. Now, this is not usually going to be the job of the safety manager, but the safety manager may be involved in the process. Now, the safety manager, when it comes to property damage and property-related incidents, our role is going to be more on the preventative side. Let's have a fire protection program in place to prevent loss. let's have other programs in place to prevent losses. So on the insurance side, when it comes to building and personal property, we may not be as involved, but we could be. Another type of insurance that's out there that is important to businesses Another type of coverage that's out there that's important to businesses would be business income insurance. This type of insurance coverage provides for lost income if the business is not able to function for an extended period. And I alluded to this example earlier in one of the other videos. Let's say a tornado knocks out a company's only production facility. The company's not producing. If it's not producing, it's not selling. There's no money coming in. That could be the end of the business under those circumstances. But with business income insurance, they can receive indemnity payments based on the expected income minus their actual income during the interruption. For example, if Company A normally has $1 million in earned revenue each month, but because of the tornado or other business interruption, income is only $750,000, they could be compensated with indemnity payments up to $250,000 for that period. So that's how business income insurance would work. It would replace any lost income because of the interruption that occurred. The interruption wouldn't just be a tornado, it could be a power outage for an extended period of time. It could be a snowstorm that causes a roof to cave in. The business can't function because the roof is caved in. A lot of different scenarios out there that could cause a business to lose income because it's not able to operate at all during those times. Now, the cause of the interruption, though, one thing to consider, the cause of the interruption must be an insured peril. Wind, fire, earthquake, other type of weather-related event, and so on. It has to be an insured peril. Let's say if it was a flood. If a flood caused a business to shut down. There were several businesses in this area of Oklahoma several years ago that went through this. The Arkansas River flooded, their business had to shut down. Now, if they did not have flood insurance, they may not be able to recover any compensation because of business interruption due to those floods. And flood insurance is kind of a wacky kind of insurance. You have to live in certain areas in order to be able to purchase flood insurance, but there are areas that do flood where residents or businesses do not have flood insurance because they can't purchase flood insurance for that area. But anyhow, business income insurance is another type of coverage that's out there to protect businesses. Another type of insurance coverage that's important to businesses would be business auto or fleet coverage. Most businesses have vehicles. Some businesses have a lot of vehicles, and that's maybe one of their greatest sources of liability are all the vehicles that they have on the roadways. Business fleet coverage or auto fleet coverage protects the company's rolling assets. It protects vehicles that may be stolen, that may be vandalized, that may be damaged in other ways, may be damaged in a storm. This type of coverage also protects the company from its liability responsibilities when there are vehicles or when there are accidents involving their vehicles. Companies are required to jump through several hoops when it comes to obtaining and maintaining fleet coverage. The companies that need fleet coverage must provide a list of vehicles to be covered, a list of authorized drivers of those company vehicles to the insurance company. So a lot of times this ends up being the safety manager's responsibility. You may be the person responsible for maintaining the list of drivers and maintaining the list of vehicles. Larger companies are going to have a fleet manager that does this, but in smaller companies, it may be the safety manager that is responsible, and to some degree, for communicating with the insurance company and making sure the insurance company has an up-to-date list of vehicles to be covered. First company I worked for, every time we bought a new vehicle, I had to send that information to our insurance company. Every time we put on a new driver on our authorized drivers list, I had to send that information to the insurance company. Now, if there had been an accident with that new vehicle and I did not report it to the insurance company didn't know about that new vehicle wouldn't have been covered. We would not have been covered for any accident involving that vehicle. Same thing if we had a person driving a vehicle and they weren't on the authorized drivers list for the insurance company. That incident may not be covered by the insurance company. Now, not every type of fleet insurance is going to be set up this way. That was the way this fleet insurance was set up with our carrier, with our insurance carrier. We had to provide them with a list of vehicles. We had to provide them with a list of authorized drivers. We also had to perform background checks on all of our drivers before we could put them on an authorized drivers list. We had to check their MVR. If they had any incidents within the last 3 years, that could result in their not being qualified to be on the authorized drivers list. Our general rule was if you had more than 2 moving violations within the last 3 years, you could not be an authorized driver for the company. If you had any substance abuse violation, if you had a DUI, you could not be a company driver. If you had any citation for reckless driving, you would not be allowed to drive a company vehicle. And this is an important thing for you guys to consider as future safety professionals. Pay attention to your driving record. Don't let yourself accumulate a lot of tickets. If you have a lot of tickets on your driving record, that could make it difficult for you to find a job when you graduate. Many companies would be reluctant to hire a safety manager with a record of unsafe driving. It just wouldn't look good. It wouldn't be good business. I wouldn't. If someone applied, if I was working at a company and I was reviewing applications, I did the background inquiry and I found that they had 3 speeding tickets in the last 2 years. They're going in the trash can. They're not going to be considered any further. So pay attention to your driving record. Try not to get any tickets and definitely don't get any DUIs. DUI can be the end of the road for a safety professional. I've seen safety professionals lose their jobs, lose their careers because they received a DUI. That's certainly not a good thing for a safety professional to have that on their driving record. It's just not. It's going to be the end of the career in most cases. Not necessarily in all cases, but in many cases. Another thing that I've run into when it came to fleet insurance, vehicle insurance, we had one company that wanted all of our vehicles to be what they call garaged at a central location every night. We were a construction company. We had vehicles all over a 3-4 state region. It was not practical for us to bring all of our vehicles back to one location to be stored overnight. We finally were able to convince them that the way we operated with all of our mobile operations, it was impossible for us to garage all of our vehicles in a central location with protection every night. Now that might work for some companies, for some businesses, but it may even work for some construction companies, but for our company, the way we operated, it was impossible. Again, they finally relented when they understood that it was not going to be possible for us to meet that requirement. Let's see. Professional liability insurance, another consideration for safety professionals. Professional liability insurance protects professionals who may be subject to lawsuits resulting from performing their normal duties. Classic example of professional liability insurance is malpractice insurance for medical professionals. When the doctor amputates the wrong leg, well, malpractice insurance will protect them financially from the lawsuits that they are going to be subjected to. That's a form of professional liability insurance. It protects medical professionals from mistakes they make in diagnoses or medical procedures. Again, doctor amputates the wrong leg and is sued by the patient. Another type of professional liability insurance is referred to as errors and omissions insurance, and this is more applicable to safety professionals. Safety professionals and other professionals who may make mistakes. We do make mistakes occasionally. Sometimes our mistakes could contribute to harm, could cause harm to others. Again, not intentionally, but accidentally, mistakes can cause harm to others. An example would be, say, a safety trainer says in a training session that it's safe to work in an area where carbon monoxide is present at 300 parts per million. As a result of this safety training, the worker thinks it's safe, thinks he's safe. It's 290 parts per million, the carbon monoxide level. So the worker thinks he's safe to work in that environment for an extended period of time. And as a result, he's permanently disabled. As a result, he doesn't die, but he's permanently disabled from working 9 hours, 10 hours in 290 parts per million carbon monoxide. That worker may sue the safety trainer. If that worker sues the safety trainer that made the mistake, their errors and omissions insurance will at least partially protect that safety trainer, up to coverage limits. You can. One thing about errors and omissions insurance, it's relatively inexpensive. I encourage all of you, especially if you end up working as a consultant, and I encourage all of you to look into maybe an errors and omissions insurance policy that inexpensive, and it can protect you from mistakes that you might make, mistakes that might result in harm to others in some cases. Another example, let's say we incorrectly advise workers on how to use fall protection equipment. Because we incorrectly advise them on how to use fall protection equipment, a worker dies. Well, that worker's family could conceivably come back and hold us liable, get us and sue us in a court of law. Errors and omissions insurance, not only does it help us financially if there's a judgment against us. If we have a judgment that said we're liable for $750,000, that errors and omissions insurance will cover that judgment amount. But it can also, depending on the policy, provide funds for our legal defense from in those types of lawsuits. So something to certainly look into, especially if you end up doing any kind of consulting work. Commercial package policies combines different coverages into one policy. We could have auto, fleet, property, general liability, all combined into one policy. Now, what we're talking about here on this slide are some variations of the types of policies that we've already talked about. Umbrella coverage, this is a coverage that sits on top of other coverages. It provides additional coverage over the coverage limits of our other policies. Say we have a liability policy with coverage limits up to $5 million. Well, the umbrella coverage could be an additional liability policy that would cover anything over $5 million. In some circumstances, it would be worth considering this type of coverage. Insurance that protects the companies specifically for any environmental damage that it may be responsible for. Again, insurance to protect companies from liability for environmental damage associated with their operations. Now, some of the other coverages may have some environmental coverage, some of the other types of policies, but that may not be enough. It may be worth considering a specific policy to protect the company from any environmental damage that they may cause. We could do a whole class just talking about different forms of insurance, but I want to go ahead and end this unit here by sharing some additional concepts with you that you should study when you are preparing for the ASP, CSP. These are some additional concepts that you may also encounter as you work as a practicing safety professional. Product liability, we've touched on product liability, but that's a concept that does and can show up on the certification exams. Warranties, different types of warranties. Tort law and negligence as related to liability. Co-insurance is another concept to review for the certification exams. Reinsurance. Bonding and suretyship also are forms of insurance that could show up on certification exams. Commercial crime coverage also. And also there's maybe of all of these concepts here, make sure that you have a pretty good handle on basic legal contracts and the law that applies to contracts. That tends to show up quite often on certification exams. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close the book on Unit 1. Do let me know if you have any questions about any of the concepts, any of the material that I've covered in Unit 1. When we come back in Unit 2, we're going to look more closely, more specifically at workers' compensation coverage, which again is the focus of our class.